Hi, my name's Rebecca. I love reading and I have no friends that also love reading the same genres of book as me. I personally love fantasy and sci-fi. My only friend that really reads a lot of murder mysteries, which I do enjoy, but just I need to be able to talk about these books that I love so much. So I have created this YouTube channel with the intention of doing just that. I'm gonna do the BookTube Newbie Tag. I'm really rambly, so TikTok and shorts don't always work for me. Also, I just think I'm trying to find people that have similar interests to me when it comes to books, and I find like TikTok, a lot of people I know see it, and I don't particularly have an issue with that, but also I don't want them talking to me about the books I read. So firstly it says, why did you start this channel? Which I have just said. It's just like I'm constantly trying to talk to people about the books I read, and obviously nobody cares. So maybe by creating this channel, I will find people that care. And even if you don't, I can just talk into the void, and that's absolutely fine. So it says, what are you most excited for about this new channel? I would say, just as I said, being able to like just talk about books. I feel so strongly about the books I read and love, and I'm just really excited to have a space where I can talk about that. Even if no one's listening, I don't care. I just want to be able to talk about the books that I love and not have to worry about whether I'm boring someone, because if you're watching this, you're choosing to watch it. Why do I love reading? I love reading for escapism. I love reading because I love being immersed in other worlds. I read loads of fantasy, loads of sci-fi. I just love getting myself lost in these like other worlds. I've always loved film and TV as well, and I think I've found now books that I enjoy in the same way, and I think that's a more positive thing for me to be doing rather than just like binge watching TV. What book or series got you into reading? So when I was younger, I read a lot of things like The Hunger Games, classic, things like that, Percy Jackson. And then I kind of stopped like loads of people did. And then in 2022, I picked up The Song of Achilles because it was being recommended to me and I loved it. I read quite a bit in 2022, but maybe not as much as I've read this year. So I read 24 books in 2022, and to be honest, I just wasn't finding the genre of books that I liked. I hadn't started reading much fantasy. I was reading a lot of historical fiction and contemporary literature, the latter of which I don't think I enjoy that much, which is fine. There's some of the books that I do like, but on the whole, not so much. And then this year, I did what so many did, and people did, and I picked up ACOTAR. And from there, I binge read that. I didn't enjoy the first book at all, but I just kept going, and it was kind of like a guilty pleasure thing. And then from there, I read quite a bit of romantasy, and then I finally picked up The Power of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and I was like, okay, this is for me. High fantasy is for me. And since then, I have been reading a lot more of those kind of books, and I'm really excited for 2024 because I've got such a good TBR for the year. But yes, so basically ACOTAR this year. I read 100 books this year, and honestly that's because of ACOTAR. And to be honest, it's not my favourite series, but I don't feel like I can chat too much rubbish about it because honestly, it's how I got back into reading, so I'll always be grateful for that. What challenges do you think starting a BookTube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I think for me, getting past the cringe of videoing myself. I think once I get going, I'm fine. But also, I just feel like, who actually cares? Who wants to hear me speak? Also, I just think finding the time. But I don't think it really matters. I'm doing this for my own enjoyment. It'd be great if other people enjoy it too, but that's not why I'm doing it. And also just anxiety over putting myself online and videoing myself and people in my life seeing it. But I'm trying not to care. So if that is you and you're seeing this, no, you didn't. Shut up, leave me alone. When did I start reading? Well, as I said, really this year is when reading became my personality this year. In 2022, I was really enjoying it. I was reading a lot, but just not at the same rate that I read now. I think my reading level has improved, but also my lifestyle and the way that I plan my day around reading has just meant that I can read so much more. Where do I read? Everywhere. My commute, that can take 45 minutes, and so that's to and from work. I'll read on the train. I read as soon as I get up in bed. I read before bed, in my bed. I'm one of those people that like wherever I'm going, I'll put my Kindle in my bag. I don't need to do that. And often I don't even bother reading it, but if we go out for the day, I'll bring a book. Always be prepared with a book. What kind of books do I like to read? As I already said, fantasy and sci-fi mainly. I also love dark academia, but I think I don't like to read it in the same volumes that I like to read fantasy and sci-fi. I think I'll pick up dark academias that people that I trust have really enjoyed, because I do think it can fall flat sometimes. Some of my favourite reads from this year were dark academias. As I said, I read 100 books this year. I thought while we're here, I might as well talk about all of my favourite books that I read that I have physical copies of. I think I'll make a video about all the books I loved in 2023, but right now I literally just have these books beside me, so I thought I might as well run through them to give you an idea of the type of books that I'm reading. So as I said, the first book that I read this year that I loved was The Power of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This was the first high fantasy I read, and the pacing is a bit odd, and I put that down to me not being used to reading these kind of books, but I've heard other people say it since, and for me it wasn't an issue. I felt so immersed in the world and I was really enjoying the story, and so it didn't bother me. I was quite happy just to keep going, enjoy the story. If you don't already know anything about this book, it is about a world divided. We have the East and the West, and they have very differing opinions on dragons. Now, dragons are very rare in the West and they don't exist as such. So in the West, they defeated the dragons that they had, and they do not like dragons. Whereas in the East, they view the dragons as gods, and people train to be dragon riders. So throughout this book, you're getting multiple POVs, I think 2 of which are in the West and 2 of which are in the East. There is a sapphic romance within this, and yes, if you like dragons, give this a go. It has been described as a feminist Lord of the Rings, which I think isn't really a good comparison in terms of plot and storyline. However, in terms of the vastness of the world, I definitely felt that. And as I was reading, I was like, and this is where the second film would start, and like imagining what the films would look like, because I think this would make a great 3 films, just these 800 pages. Well, just, it is a big chunky book, but given it was the first high fantasy I read, I mean, it can't be that hard to read, because I honestly don't think I was that good at reading when I picked this up. Anyway, I then didn't pick up my next favourite read until September. I'd say what I was reading for a while was lots of fun books, and it was exactly what I needed at the time, escapism. But anyway, in September I picked up the MBor Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This is the final book in the trilogy. This last chunk of this book is amazing. I mean, the rest of the book is amazing as well, but I think if you know Brandon Sanderson, you know that he is very heavy on the world building. He builds these amazing worlds. He wants you to know every little detail about the structure of his worlds, which can sometimes make it feel quite slow. So I'd say the second book in this trilogy is very slow, in my opinion. And if you're currently struggling through that, power through, because this book was so good. I loved it. And this is set in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. We follow Vin, so we have a female protagonist, if that's something that's important to you. And we're kind of thrown in, and for a while you won't know what's going on. If you haven't read much fantasy before, and you don't understand the first half of book vibe that you've got to do, where you just wait to find out what's happening, power through with this. Brandon Sanderson deserves the hype that he gets. The next book that I read and loved was The Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is a fantasy dark academia, which I loved. We follow, what's she called? Alex, who can see ghosts. And it's set at Yale, where there are lots of secret societies. This is very good. I don't want to say too much because I think if I say too much about it, I'll ruin it. However, if you do think about picking this up, do check trigger warnings, because there is just one part of the story that is quite potentially upsetting to some people. So just double check those before you pick it up. The next book that I read and loved was The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. Hopefully I've said that right. This is the 3rd book in the Wolf Den trilogy. I started the trilogy in 2022. It's a historical fiction based in Pompeii, and we follow Amara, who has been through misfortune after her father's death, been sold into slavery and sold as a prostitute. And so I think she's from Greece, and she gets they ship her to Pompeii, where she lives in the Wolf Den with other women. And it's a story about her finding what power she can and grasping it. You know, she wants to get herself out of the situation she's in. She's an intelligent girl. She was very fortunate in the sense that her father was a doctor and educated her, so she's able to use what smarts she does have and what power she does have to, I would almost say, manipulate men in order to get herself into a better living situation. And that's kind of the first book. But this one wraps up the trilogy, and I think it did it perfectly. I don't want to give too much away, but honestly, I don't think that I could have come up with a better way for this series to end. This was perfect. I loved it. If you haven't picked up that trilogy yet, I do recommend it, especially if you're someone that enjoys historical fiction. It obviously isn't fantasy or sci-fi, but I think the setting where, you know, they're worshipping the Greek gods and there's lots of references to that. I think if you're someone that enjoys ancient Greece, this is definitely a really good read. Yes, 10 out of 10. The next book I read and loved this year was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I hope I've said her last name right. When I was reading this, I thought it was going to be a 4-star read, and the ending of this book had me just staring at the wall for like half an hour, questioning my whole existence. So if you don't already know anything about this book, a nice description on the front says, lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space, which is pretty accurate. I was very confused at the start of this book, but just stick with it, it'll make sense eventually. This is definitely one where you get thrown in the deep end a little bit. There's world building throughout, but it's, you know, it's not one of those ones where it just info dumps you in the first 100 pages. The other thing about this book that was quite unique was the humour. Gideon, our main character, it has very dry humour, is kind of silly humour at times as well, which I really enjoyed. I love dry humour, I love sarcasm, and I just found it to be perfect. I have also seen some people describe this as a sapphic romance, and I don't know where that comes from. There's definitely romantic behaviour, and obviously they're lesbians. However, to call it a sapphic romance, I think, is misselling it. There's so, like, that's not really a part of this story at all. And I wouldn't say that the love can be purely defined as romantic, but the ending was so powerful for this book. Also, if you're in the UK, we have the American published versions over here, so there's no English published versions, which means floppy book. Now, if you're from the UK, you know that this is so rare. For example, I'm also currently reading the 5th season. Need I say more? Like, you flatten it down and... Anyway, another selling point for the book. I've also got Harry the Ninth. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it as much, but I've heard a few people say that they've thought the same, that they might not enjoy Harry the Ninth as much, and it really surprised them. So I'm very excited to read that this year. And then the last book I read of 2023 was actually one of my favourite reads of the year, like could be in the #1 spot, and it's The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I've seen some people call this book overrated. I mean, I personally disagree. I love ancient Greece, and I think listening to them talk in their classes, the way they communicate with each other, everything about this book was perfect. It's also the first book I annotated. You can see that's how much I enjoyed it. This book, we follow Richard, who is attending a prestigious university in, I think, New England College, yeah. So, under the influence of their charismatic classics professor, a group of clever, eccentric misfits at an elite New England college discover a way of thinking and living that is a world away from the humdrum existence of their contemporaries. But when they go beyond the boundaries of normal morality, their lives are changed profoundly forever. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the philosophical discussions. I loved the characters. I loved the way it was written. Like, I saw someone describe this as slow. I did not find this slow. I could not put it down. I was like, I mean, maybe I can understand how you might find it slow, but I mean, one of these tabs is for me wishing that I studied classics. Now, there was no way I was going to be able to study classics at university. I think most people already have heard a lot about this story, but yeah, 10 out of 10 recommend if you haven't already read it. And then the book that I'm starting off 2024 with is the 5th season, as I mentioned. Really enjoying this so far. Everyone says this is incredible and brilliant, and I think that set my expectations super high. I am really enjoying it, but I'm kind of hoping that the end is going to make this a 5-star read. I think currently it's a 4-star read for me. I'm really enjoying it though, and I think I'll probably read the rest of the series. So I realised when I was editing this that I forgot to film an outro because I am a BookTube newbie and I have no idea what I'm doing, but clearly I need to get a bit more organised if I'm going to decide to keep making videos like this. In terms of the content I'm hoping to bring to this page, I'm hoping to do book reviews, little reading wrap-ups, and just any real bookish content. I'm really excited to talk about my TBR for this year. I've tried to pull together a 24 for 2024, so hopefully I'll make a video on that soon when I can find the time. But thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far, and hopefully I will speak to you again soon.